Hello, Onyx PathCon. Welcome to the Storypath Ultra panel, where we talk about some percentage of things relating to Storypath Ultra. I cannot give you a firm number because I don't know yet. We'll see how this goes. I
You
am
should
Eddy
use a
Webb.
dice roller for that.
I can roll percentile, yes, several D100, or I can use a dice roller like we have currently online on our Discord. We are currently testing out
Oh,
the
oh,
Storypath
oh.
Ultra slash Storypath Dice Bot. But before we get into all that, I am Eddy Webb. I am the executive producer of Onyx Path. I'm one of the in-house developers. And one of the things that I oversee is making sure that Storypath Ultra is used consistently across all of our Storypath games. With me is Danielle. Please introduce yourself and explain how you relate to this.
Hi, I'm Danielle Lauzon. I am no longer an in-house developer. That's okay because I'm still here. Uh,
Secretly, in the
Mwahaha.
rafters.
yeah. I worked with Eddie and Rich to kind of take Storypath, a classic, and bring it into Storypath Ultra, making it a more streamlined version. So I did a lot of the initial rules design for converting Storypath to Storypath Ultra. And of course, have been working hard with both Eddie and Matthew as we have been developing some of the newer Storypath Ultra games to ensure that, the Storypath Ultra stuff is consistent and makes sense. And when we add a thing from one game, we figure out how it relates to another and that kind of thing. So.
Indeed. And Rich, how do you tie into all this?
Well, I'm Rich Thomas, founder and creative director of Onyx Path Publishing, and I'm generally in terms of dealing with rules and systems analysis. I'm the kibitzer.
Mhm,
I'm
mhm.
the one who pokes holes at a few things, or if something didn't isn't as clear as I'm reading it. I know what the intent is, but it's coming across unclearly. That's a lot of what I will be doing while versions of the rules are being passed around. So,
Mhm,
Awesome.
mhm.
So to kind of start, for people who may not be aware of what the heck we're talking about, StoryPath Ultra is the latest iteration of our StoryPath system, which we released, what, 2014-ish, Rich?
sure.
Around there. Whenever,
Pre-COVID, so time has no meaning.
right, right. So some number of years before COVID, we released the StoryPath system, and that was a update, refinements, a reimplementation of stuff that we've learned over the years working on
Dice pool
storyteller and
systems.
storytelling systems. Yeah. Um, and we were honestly very happy with it. We still to this day, I still think it's a really fantastic system. But over the years, we certainly noticed that there were a few things that were unclear, some systems that we implemented or we designed that turned out weren't really being used the way we thought they would, or just weren't being used at all. Other things that we thought were extremely clear turned out to not be. And so, Rich, if I remember this correctly, you were the one that's like, say, hey, maybe it's worth doing kind of a refinement
Hmm.
of this system into a new. It's not a new addition. It's not a new system. It's just kind of a refinement of what was already there.
Yeah, I don't know if there's a particular tipping point where that stuff starts to occur, but when you see enough good points being made by people who are actually playing and using the system over and over and
Mhm.
over again, and
Yeah.
where they go, look, that's great. And we actually, I think we actually put out a survey uh,
Hmm.
uh, to our community that hit on those things. We might not have been deliberately saying, here, this is just about rules. What do you think? But by the time we looked at the information from the surveys, it became obvious to us that there were a few things in StoryPath that were confusing,
Mhm.
Hmm.
like big time. And especially if you do a bunch of different games, how they're implementing it each time, you're trying to find the sweet spot that works for the game, but also overall. And we were seeing that there were things that worked in, oh, I don't know, let's just say Aberrant, that didn't work as well in Scion or vice versa. And that sort of, and they came from and things like that. So we went and said, what we've learned over these years of having done this, and from hearing from the people who are actually playing this, let's see what we can do to bring it down, fine tune it, make it easier to understand and more coherent. Are there systems we could just drop, right? Are there systems that we have to rephrase or put in a certain way? And that's what that's what we get.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I know that there was a point where I was so sick of explaining scale because it makes sense. It just the way it was explained, the way it was described was just confusing, absolutely 100%. And there was just, some people absolutely got it, and some people would be like, well, these have numbers in this table, and because they have numbers in this table, I don't understand how these things relate to each other. And the text was saying one thing, and the tables were showing something completely different. And I think we just renamed it to Advantage. We left out the tables and we gave some examples, and everybody was like, oh, yeah, now I get it.
Right.
Right.
And that's the thing, because if you're trying to communicate what your intent was to each of these different groups as you move along, your communications aren't necessarily absolutely perfect either. And
Mhm.
so the attempt to make a table, make another table over here, it just made it more confusing because there's
Right,
all these different answers out there. We wanted to wrap that all up and say, no, this is how it works.
right,
Still a great
Okay.
idea, but this is how it works.
right.
Right. So, very much, the intent was, uh, it wasn't. It was a bit more than simply putting out, like, say, an FAQ, or clarifying a few pieces of ROTA, because it was a little more endemic than that. But also, it wasn't like, oh, this game has problems, needs to be fixed either. Rather, it was, like we said, it's cleanup, it's a refinement. Um, and also, when I started working with Danielle on it, if I remember correctly, Danielle, you were kind of quick to point out that, like, there's lots of bits of this system that we just weren't using
Yeah.
in very exciting ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest part of the system that I saw not being utilized was the complication system.
Mhm.
So people had, all these like tricks and or at the time they were called stunts. Lots of stunts being used all over the place, but the complications were being used in a way that didn't really mesh with what they were saying they were doing. They were
Mhm.
kind of being used as just a modifier for difficulty, and they weren't allowing the game to drive the story forward. And it was something that I had noticed in both Scion and Trinity that, we often kind of said, you get a complication on this thing, but we really didn't say what happened if you didn't buy it off. And we also didn't give a lot of guidance to story guides on how to add complications, what they really should be there for. So it was my biggest like, okay, here's what we need to do to really make the system be a framework is understand, I guess understand what it is the system is doing. And the system is giving you the chance to succeed on something, but always, most of the time, I didn't say always, but most of the time, figuring out a way that if that action itself doesn't just drive the story forward because you're, punching someone in the face or, you know, getting out, driving across the country or, whatever, then something may happen in response to the fact that you took that action. So
Right.
it's not a failure, it's just you did the thing 100%. But now there is some consequence of your actions. And we had that a little bit, but I really wanted that to be, that's what makes this game and this system, in my opinion, different from a lot of other systems that use, extra successes, extra hits, extra whatever they want to call them, pips. uh oh, you can use that to buy extra things on your action. Like, yeah, lots of systems do that, but I could choose to use my extra hits to make my action better by getting extra stuff, but I could also do it to stop a bad thing from happening or a possible consequence from happening. Became a risk reward system that I've literally never seen in another game, and it was one that made me really excited about Storypath Ultra and Storypath in general. It's there in Storypath, we just weren't doing it. So I was like, let's make that first and foremost. Let's make it front and center and make this a true risk reward system, and then slot all of our games into that mindset. And since then, like, I feel like that is the big one. I mean, there's a bunch of other things that we
Sure.
just tweaked a little, but that was the big one where I was like, this is here. I didn't have to do a whole lot. Like, we didn't do very much to change the system. It was just how we wrote about it, how we explained it, and how we kind of talk about what you do with it. That I feel makes it really feel like, okay, now I get it. Now I understand. There's always going to be some kind of something going on every time you try to take an action.
Yeah, and actually that segues nicely into kind of why would you use Storypath as a system? Some of the benefits of Storypath, and you hit on definitely a big one, which is that um, lots of actions have nuanced responses. One things that people have criticized the system for, and I personally think extremely unfairly, is that it's complicated, and it really isn't. What happens is that um, there's an extra step in figuring out whether your dice succeeded or not. But unlike a lot of other games, that extra step accounts for 90% of the game system. Because if you look at, say, D&D, D&D will tell you, oh, okay, so it's roll d20, add some numbers together, and tell you whether to succeed or not. Except that combat adds in a whole new other stuff on top of that, which doesn't quite work the same way. And then, there's skill challenges, which also don't work quite exactly that way either. And so what happens is each system slightly modifies the core system. You have to learn all of those. Whereas with Storypath, everything works on the get dice pull together, roll those, check for complications, add your enhancements, and then sort out your results. Everything builds off of that engine. And that's one of the huge advantages of Storypath is that once you learn an engine for one Storypath Ultra game, that engine works the same way in all other Storypath Ultra games.
Yep.
That's something we've been working really hard towards, is that the details of each game will differ. Like, obviously, Curseborne magic works differently from the world below magic. The at the gates is not going to work the same way as they came from. I mean, like these are all meant to be distinct games. But if you've played one of those games, if you've played At the Gates and go, I know Dice Rolling works, and you pick up Curseborne, oh, Dice Rolling works exactly the same way. What I'm doing with those complications and hits are completely different, but that core system is identical between games.
Right.
And I think that was something, Rich, you were very keen on when you were kibitzing about this, is like making that as clear as possible.
Right, we experimented like with a lot of it's the evolution of Storypath as we went from game to game to game. Coming into Storypath Ultra, we wanted this to be very clear and very much very consistent between each game line that uses it, so that it is in fact a house system. And when there are things that are very bespoke, if you will, about a setting, and we want that reflected in the system, that's where we put in, yes, this is special, because that lets people realize, oh, this part, yeah, that's the bit there's even more flavorful stuff going on in here, as opposed to like a base generic system,
Right, exactly. And one of the advantages of doing it this way is Danielle and I worked on what we called for a long time an internal design document, something that we can then give to designers who worked on each game and then go, here's the core system, implement this way. Pretty quickly, we realized that that's basically just a core systemless rule book, something that Onyx Path's never done before, but certainly other game companies have.
Right.
And so that led to the creation of the Storypath Ultra Core Manual, which was crowdfunded last year. Last year?
Yeah, last year. So much got crowdfunded last year.
Right.
So much.
But as a result of doing that, and also working in these other games, one thing we were able to do is to kind of lock down our terminology in a way that we hadn't done before, right? Because as Rich kind of pointed out, with Storypath Original, it was here's the guts of the system, but then build on it however you want. But now so we have make a more systemic approach. So we have what we call the core system, and that's that identical or nearly identical spine. Down to a perfect example of this is on one SPU game, someone want to change skill names. It's like, no, we do not change the skill names. Skill names are identical across all of the games. What the skill does may be different. Science means something different in the world below than it means in Curseborne, for example. But the science skill exists in every game. So those are core rules. They do not change, or if they change, there has to be a fantastically good reason why. Like, for example, we rename conditions occasionally, or sorry, status effects occasionally, just to make it super clear what's going on with it. But otherwise, it works. The fact how status effects exist and how they work works the same.
Is it going to clarify something, or is it going to make it more confusing and make that call
right
about making the change? Yep.
Then we have expansion, where there's a system that doesn't need to be as detailed for some games, but could be used to be more details for others. And so when we add more depth and complexity to it, it's building on that core system, but it's an optional thing. So, for example, this is Curseborne. A game like Steam Wars doesn't need a comprehensive investigation system. It's basically a game of big, clanky metal robots punching each other, which is fantastic, and I love it. I think Steam Wars is great. It doesn't need a nuanced, detailed investigation system, but Curseborne really does. It is very much a game about mysteries. And so we took that core investigation system and built on it and expanded what it can do. You could expand with combat. You could expand with vehicle rules. You could expand on those things. Like, we're not changing the core rules. We're building depth and complexity on top of them because the games need more nuance, because that's a key thing this game needs to do. And then finally, we have the concept which we call building blocks, which are those bespoke systems that do drop in. So again, using Curseborne example, spells are a building block. How spells work in Curseborne drops in. The world below has dropped in a completely different spell building block into that slot. Steam Wars, the idea of how giant robots work, that's all a building block of rigs and how they work that got put in. And those can be customized to whatever degree a game needs. Certainly, if we've done a version of that before, there's no reason not to kind of reinvent the wheel. For example, we have in the core manual a mass combat system functionally. And so when we looked at things like Steam Wars, well, Steam Wars can benefit from large-scale combat because it's a war game. It doesn't work quite the same way, but it's like we customized for Steam Wars because the tech was there, but still you can do a lot with it. But mass combat isn't a core system.
Right.
So
Whereas I think Matthew is using that in Monster Kingdoms.
Yes. Right. And that's very much more kind of like Dynasty Warriors, one guy with a banner leading a bunch of army, which is a slightly different thing,
Right.
So that's kind of, so from a design perspective, that's one of the reasons why Storypath Ultra is very exciting, is because it'll be, we're hoping for, it will be a very good balance of, I recognize this game and, oh, but it's doing new stuff. And if you're inclined towards design, you could do stuff like, I want to have giant robot mechs in Curseborne. You can take one system out of one game, maybe tweak a few numbers here and there because they are bespoke, but then drop it into another game, and it more or less works if you really want to do that. And one of the things that the core manual does is to kind of expose some of our design decisions and ideas of why we built things the way they did, so that you can then make decisions on your own to make your own building blocks and settings and how to do that and whatnot. So I mean, I think that's all very exciting. And also, if you like your games that are very, I think Danielle called it antagonist or protagonist forward, where it's not that the protagonists always win, but certainly they have a really good chance.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes people get confused because, again, they look at that and go, oh, so you can't really do a horror game. Well, I mean, we did. We made Curseborne. But it's a different. It's not a bleak. The fun is trying to succeed at all in a horrible environment kind of horror, right?
Yeah. Well, there's also, when you think about Curseborne and, the thing I was talking about earlier, it really shows like, oh yeah, we can do a horror game, and it's that consequence of action, right?
Right.
And instead of consequence of action being, something adventure-y or, whatever, pulp horror or pulp adventure or straight up adventure or superhero type thing you want to do. Now the consequence of action is, the stakes are so much more grotesque or terrible.
Right.
Your consequences are no longer just, oh, well, oh, your investigation's messed up, or oh, somebody's gonna show up and beat you up. Now it's the consequence of your action is someone down the street is being, affected in a really negative way, and you did that. Too bad.
Right.
And, we doubled down on it by creating the curse dice, the wicked successes and the cruel failures, because those come in they're an extra subsystem, but they add additional consequence to your action, ones that you just can't buy off. So you can buy off complications, you can control it to a certain degree, but the horror of it is that there will always sometimes, when you're casting magic, when you're doing things that play with the supernatural elements of the world, you can't stop the consequences of your actions anymore.
Right. Exactly. Uh, so we'll talk a bit more about SPU, but for the moment, I want to pause and say this is definitely intended to be a bit more of a Q&A panel than some other
Mhm,
panels.
mhm.
So if you do have questions, feel free to drop them into the chat. We ask you preface them with the word question in all caps in front of it. That allows Travis, our fantastic tech person, to be able to find those and surface those questions to us so we can see them here. And since we're here, one question we've already gotten is, what is one tip you would give to new story guides running your games?
So I think the things that I would give as a tip, like the biggest tip, is don't be afraid to play with the concept of, consequence. Um, there's a lot of, text, and there's a lot of stuff, and we've, kind of pushed this complication forward, put a complication, let the players know what the complication is so that they can know whether or not they want to buy it off before they even roll. But, sometimes it's a lot of work to do that if they fail. Like, that doesn't even come up. And I think, if you are worried about always having some kind of complication available, when you're planning your session, your scenario, have a couple of things that could go wrong no matter what, right? No matter what they're doing, these are some story beats or some story points that could crop up. You don't have to anticipate everything your players are going to do. You can instead just kind of say, okay, well, there's this bad guy, and this is how he kind of reacts to things, and this is how he, uh, you know, these are his goals. This is what he wants to push forward. And so these are the things that could happen no matter what somebody's doing, how he might react to a situation. And, if somebody rolls a success in a moment where you're like, oh, it'd be really dramatic to say that this could happen, they'd be like, okay, yeah, so now that we could see that you've got a success on this, you've got plenty of hits. I'm going to say that there's a complication on this, minor, that this might happen. And now when they're trying to figure out how to spend those extra hits, they've got this decision to allow that to happen or buy it off. And it can be more reactive than I think a lot of people are thinking it needs to be. But yeah, pre-prepare things that could happen and be prepared to just, wing it especially if the players are maybe succeeding too often. And that sometimes that can feel good, and it's not something you want to disrupt. The characters are meant to succeed. They are competent at the things they do. So the roles are for, things that should have some kind of consequence of failure, but also consider that, oh, because you're taking this action, like, yeah, it's probably going to happen, but what are my forces that I'm playing with going to do in reaction to it? And just kind of think that way. It's not a normal way to think when you're running a game, but I think if you start to think that way before the session even starts,
Right.
it
Yeah,
will start to become more natural as you run the games.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I mean, that's the thing, is rather than cold coming into the whole thing,
Hmm.
have a few things that you can pull out of your pocket
Right.
to move the story along. The classic, the door gets kicked in, a guy with a gun comes in. Boom. What happened?
Absolutely.
Right.
What does your group do about that? Or
Right.
something, a building explodes down the street, or anything that just there's a door. Well, what's behind the door? They're going to go nuts trying to figure out what's behind the door, especially if it's locked.
Yeah.
Go through there, and it could be inconsequential to the overall story or that they're making or that you've already prepared or whatever. But having that in there to allow for the chance to play through things can give you a little bit of breathing room. I would say as don't be afraid and let them know ahead of time that sometimes you're going to make calls that they're going to disagree with.
Mhm.
Your interpretation of what's going on there, because that's why we have the dice in the rule sets to move things along and to finalize certain parts of it. Did the bomb go off? Did it not go off?
Mhm.
It's an either or state. It either went off or didn't go off.
Right.
So if you're in moments like that and somebody's like, I'm trying to look this up on this thing and I'm looking on here, and just say, go ahead, roll a 10-sider,
Mhm.
six or higher, you get you whatever, and anything below that, the other 50%, which it's not 50%,
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
but just make it. You make an arbitrary call if it gets things rolling. Keep things rolling. Keep the story going. Keep and if it's a moment where people are really interacting, you just step back and let that happen.
Yep.
You know,
Yeah,
but
and similarly, that actually leads to the tip I was going to give, which is that one thing that we've been doing with a lot of a lot of Storypath games, specifically with SPU, is giving people lots of options. Here's lots of cool tricks you can use if you get successes. Here's lots of cool status effects you can apply. Here's lots of cool complications you can use. But the actual rules of the game are about 4 pages.
Mhm.
Because there are in every Storypath game we have a small chunk called general tricks. All tricks are more or less variations of those. So if you're
Mhm.
not sure if players like I have some extra dice, I'm not sure what to do with them, have them look at that general trick and go, give somebody else enhancement, give somebody else this, make this thing easier for yourself, in a very general way. If you're not sure what complications to give to a thing, but you feel like something might go wrong, but you're not sure what that is yet, you could just occasionally say, there's a minor complication on this. Let's see what happens. And then if the player doesn't buy it off, work with the player. Okay, what do you think went wrong here? So I mean, it's okay to have bring the player into that part of the process. You don't have to do all this work as story
Mhm.
guide.
Mhm.
Feel free to collaborate with your players on this kind of stuff.
yeah, if you leave it vague and they fill it in and
Great.
it works for you, woohoo! That's one less thing you have to figure out.
Yep.
Which actually leads to the question we just got, which is our opinion on obscuring complications before rolls, for example, is a major complication instead of it's a major complication, which is a trap. I'll let Danielle answer that first before I go to my opinion.
Yeah. So, in my personal opinion, uh, why?
Mm,
My why would you do that? Is that because it's more exciting for the players? If they're asking for more mystery, more intrigue, then go for it. If they want to know that there's something that could happen, but they don't know what as a player, then yeah, okay. But if you're doing it to surprise your players with a thing that they happen that they
A
weren't
jump scare.
expecting, a
yeah,
jump scare, like don't do that. That's not a jump scare. That's just a bad feeling. Um, you you should trust your players to make decisions about what they're going to do, especially because you're talking about before the rolls, but really it's the before they decide whether or not they're going to buy it off,
right.
right? Where you don't find out what was going to happen unless you don't buy it off. And that's a way to make people feel bad. That's really all that is. It can be fun. It can sometimes lead to really cool moments, but the moment that it leads to somebody being like, this doesn't make any sense, I don't understand, or
The
oh man, if I
system
had
lied
known
to
that,
me is a lot of the
yeah,
feeling that, or you, the person who
yeah,
put me up to this, lied to me because you didn't tell me. If the expectation is that the system is always going to let you know, because that's how you play Storypath Ultra, and then that doesn't happen, they're
yeah,
not. They're going
yeah.
to blame you.
Yeah, I wouldn't do it just to do it. It has to be a conversation with the players. They have to be cool with it. If they really want that, then do it, but
Mhm.
don't just bring that on your players. It's not going to be good for you. It's not going to be good for them. And personally, I would rather the players make an informed decision or to know what the stakes are when they're rolling, because
Mm-hmm.
when you know what the consequence could be when you do this and you're like, okay, well, I need this many hits to be able to prevent that from happening, but I really still want to do this, and then you don't quite have enough hits, like everybody's like, oh my god, how are we going to deal with this? And then you like decide whether or not you're going to use momentum for enhancement and things like
Mhm.
that. And you can't make those decisions if you don't know what the stakes are.
Right.
So the system really wants people to know, to be able to, and that to be able to make informed decisions, to be able to figure out what the risks are, because the reward isn't nearly as rewarding if you don't know what the risks are.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. If you have a
Um,
table of people who want to just have the story, and you are telling them this story that they're acting things out, and are not really wanting to engage with the system, then you can pull it back to that, I think,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
that's the bargain that the table made. And you're reading your players, you're seeing what they really want to be involved with. If you're a table of people who all want to participate in the telling of the story, Storypath Ultra totally enables that, and
Yep.
and is designed for that. But you can pull it back. It's just make sure everybody's aware that that's what you're doing.
right.
Yep.
It reminds me of I believe it was Sid Meier. His definition of a game was a situation where the people involved get to make a series of interesting choices. And like all definitions of a game, it doesn't actually work when you apply it to all examples.
Mhm.
But I like that one because, at least for this discussion, it is more interesting to know, hey, biops minor complication will cause an alarm to go off than it is to go, that's my complication, something bad will happen if you don't know what it is.
Mhm. Yeah.
Now, there's one exception, which I mentioned earlier, if you don't know, but just, again, you're telling the player, we'll figure out a thing that happens bad. So they know
Mhm.
that the penalty is I get to engage with it.
Right.
It is also a way you can obfuscate the nuance of it. So for example, a few times I've run the game, I've said, I'm not a complication if you don't buy it off, someone you don't know is going to do something you're unaware of. Um, right, which is still hiding it, but they now know, okay, well, there's a mysterious thing happening specifically. I don't know if I want the
I got a
mysterious
bad
thing to
feeling
happen or
about
not.
this.
Mhm.
Right, exactly. It's the trickle up your spine, like, do I want to have this intentionally vague thing I don't know actually happened to me? But also again, then it's like, okay, I know it's not gonna happen here. It's gonna happen somewhere else, and it's not someone I know. Okay, that still gives them information, even if that information is limited.
Mhm.
You can also do things like, if you climb over this fence, the fence has a property that you're currently unaware of that will enact. Um, oh, it's electrified, turns out, right? So if you want to keep information from the players, you can still give them information without
Mhm.
telling them absolutely everything.
Right.
Well, I mean, you could also get that into narrative as well, where you're talking about the many dead flies that are lying around it,
Right.
things like that. So
Right.
Yeah.
Um, Another question, and I'll definitely take no answers first, because I'll avoid rinsing. As designers and writers, is there ever difficulty in balancing game mechanics with lore?
So I have a like I think that honestly the word balance, if I just throw that word out,
That's exactly
uh
the thing I was going to rant about.
yeah, if I just throw the word balance out, then yeah, actually sometimes matching
Integrating?
yeah, matching, integrating mechanics and lore can sometimes be a little difficult, right? You want to have a lore or just be able to say these people can do X thing, whatever X thing is, right? And then you have to think, okay, well, how do they do that mechanically? How do you uh how do you how do you make that both a thing that they can do? How do you make it interesting? Do you just say, "But they do that. They don't need to roll for it. It's just a thing they could do." Or do you need to make a mechanic for it? If you need to make a mechanic for it, then, you know, what does that mechanic look like? And is there a sub mechanic for just this one thing, or can it apply to other things? So sometimes, yeah, you kind of have to take the system that you've got and kind of wrap your lore around it and then kind of inject things for mechanics around it into it, and those things have to happen in tandem. And so integrating mechanics and lore can sometimes feel difficult, and it can sometimes be difficult. um but yeah, so yes, but balance. um,
Right. Um, Danielle and I have I believe there's actually a
we
podcast episode where we actually talked about that exact problem.
Yeah. Well, I think we talked about it just last week where we were talking about the balance
Yeah.
of a game being like, uh, oh, maybe I was talking about it with somebody. I literally had this conversation last week, which was balance only matters if one player's character is really, really cool and overpowered and amazing, and everybody else just kind of bleh. If everybody's overpowered or game breaking, or everybody has something that's just like, whoa, my God, that's cool. I love that.
Right. It goes back to does everyone have interesting choices in front of them, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So with that caveat, I completely agree. Like, I am always frustrated by games that have a cool definition of here's what the game can do, and then there's no way to actually do that in the game. Um, uh, there are a couple exceptions. Uh, there are certainly games where that's the point. Like, here's the things you could do, but for some reason you can't. And that's the frisson. Um, for example, for a long time, Vampire didn't have rules for Golconda, because that was the point. It's supposed to be kind of a mythical goal.
Mhm.
Um, so I mean, I think that is fine on some level, but ultimately, yeah, as long as you're making sure that I, I don't use the word lore, I use play experience.
Mhm.
It's when people sit down and play the game, the way the game has told them, here's the game we want you to play, here's how I want you to play it, and they sit down and roll dice, does the system actually encourage that and
Right.
support that? Um, there are certainly times where the design is doing that in what appears to be counterintuitive ways because of how math and statistics and people work. Um, so sometimes it seems like, well, you want this game to be very deadly, but it seems like people aren't doing lots of damage. And it's like, well, yes, because we have shifted a lot of that more deadly stuff into things like status effects.
Mhm.
So that way it's not about number go down, which is a traditional way of parsing that. It's the rather, if you have a very brutal weapon, you're not doing more number, you're doing status effect that sits and lingers on you.
Mhm.
And the grittier, darker games, like a Curseborne, for example, will play with that a lot more. And so you're building up all of these status effects that continue to interact and make it harder for you to do what you want to do.
Mhm.
That's going to give you more of the feeling of everything's going wrong for you than number go down.
Yeah. Which
Which,
I'm
okay.
looking at this next question,
Right.
so I'm gonna let you ask it.
Yeah, that's the next one. It's almost like that was a segue there.
Yeah, yeah.
I noticed that SPE was leaning towards slowing down combat, for example, dealing only one or two injuries at a time per attack. Is that why there's no solid rules for surprise attacks?
So, so what Eddie said, we're not actually slowing down combat.
Right.
The number go down again is not, if you're not playing the game, it's kind of hard to really wrap your head around how much it can really suck to be in a position where you've got like 2 or 3 status effects that are, or stacked conditions where it's like, I have 3 different status effects that are all giving me a complication. And if I don't buy off every single one of them, I'm going to take damage, I'm going to fall over, and I'm not going to be able to do anything but move next turn.
Right.
I can only buy off one of them and still do damage. So I guess I'm going to do damage and buy off one of them, or I'm just going to have all that bad stuff happen to me next turn so I can do a little extra damage. Yeah, and it's just, it just becomes like I need to heal or I need to do something because I am being weighed down by all these things that are, yeah, making it harder for me. So like when you are taking damage as a person, as a human, and this isn't like, I don't want to get into like simulation or anything like that, but
Right.
you don't have a health boxes or whatever, right? You have the ability to, you have your actual stamina, like how long can you sit up and take damage and do this thing that you're doing in a fist fight, right?
Mhm.
You're going to get into a fist fight, you're going to get bloody, you're going to get woozy, somebody may give you a concussion, but you may still be fighting through all that. But you're not going to be making the best decisions, you're not going to be swinging the best, you're not going to be in top form anymore. But it's not from blood loss, it's from being rattled, it's because you've got your arm is broken, it's because these other things are going on. Instead of having, we tried to model that a little bit with Storypath Classic, where we would be like,
Injury
okay,
conditions, yeah.
yeah, we take an injury condition and we realized that it was a little counterintuitive and a little hard to kind of parse what the injury conditions were and how that was working. And so instead we just decided to model just straight up status effects. Here it is. You can apply it to somebody, and that's showing yeah, it's not just number go down.
Mhm.
So, but the question is also about surprise attacks.
Yeah.
And let me tell you a little thing about surprise attacks.
Mhm.
That's not a thing that really happens.
Mhm.
If somebody comes up behind me and hits me in the back of the head, they just went before me and attacked me and hit me in the back of the head.
Right.
I'm not gonna be down. I'm not gonna be, I'm not gonna be
The
out. I might be
backstab
out,
damage, Danielle.
but right,
Backstabbing.
that's not a thing, right? Like that's just not a thing. And then the other thing that's not a thing is I may be able to react to you coming up from behind me, and it may have nothing to do with my combat prowess or how fast I am. You may have made a noise. You may have I may just have that weird like sixth sense that, like I'm hyper vigilant and I always can tell when there's somebody hovering over behind me. I may turn and stab you and you weren't even trying to hit me, but I did that, right? And you might be surprised by it, but you're going to have a reaction to that
Right.
immediately. You're not going to be standing there being like, "Oh my God, all this stuff is happening. I can't respond to it." It is just the moment somebody initiates violence against somebody else, everybody's in violence and they
Right.
react to it at the speed they react to it. And
Right.
that's just the way the real world works.
And also, like, even with the existing systems, it's very simple to model a surprise attack because we've now moved initiative to what we call the popcorn initiative system,
Yeah.
where you're just wanting to see who goes first, and after that, someone chooses somebody else. Surprise attack, whoever's surprising goes first.
Yeah. And they get all their
Um,
buddies to go before all the bad guys.
right, right. So it's already there. Again, that's a case of where um, one of the things that I really love about Storypath Ultra is that it's taking some of the uh, uh, design that were kind of the way that all these things were that we kind of inherited slightly with Classic. Classic did a lot of changes, a lot of innovation and renovation, but there were still a couple things like, but it's always been this way, and let's get rid of those if they're getting
Mhm.
in the way of what the story system really, really needs.
Right.
So things like uh, uh, you roll initiative when you don't know who is gone first. That is why you
Hmm.
roll initiative,
Yeah.
because it's unclear. We're both staring at each other. Who's going to draw first? Yeah,
Yeah.
let's roll for initiative. But again, it's purely just to figure out who, because then it becomes player decisions and who's going to go next. Ultimately, how the combat rolls out is really in the player's hands. Yes, occasionally
Mhm.
the control passes to the guide and the guide passes the spotlight back to the players, but really the players get to decide how do we want the combat to go down. So we just don't need the same kind of thing, but we do want to emulate occasionally, like Danielle said. If you try to backstab the Flash, it's probably going to go bad for you, because he's super fast. And so, of course, he's going to get a bonus to initiative and be able to kind of preempt these things. And that's another reason why we don't have explicit rules, because a lot of this is situational, right? It's like if in Curseborne, you're mugging someone in an alley, then it's probably going to be, okay, roll the hits, give them a status effect. If you're still up, then we'll talk about initiative possibly. Whereas in something like, say, Trinity Kingdom Steam Wars, it's meant to be more of a pulpish kind of thing. So if you knock someone in the back of the head, that's just how that's just how you start the fight, right? It's like you hit them with a blackjack and they go, all right,
just
now I'm gonna get you,
yeah, you
Yeah,
just
you
got to
made me angry.
right. You
Right.
just kind of got to go first, and
Yeah.
then we roll initiative to see, okay, does somebody react before your friends react to what you just did?
Right. Right. Rich, did you have any other thoughts on any of that stuff? I think so.
No, sir.
Okay. So we have a few more minutes left. So if you have more questions, we're happy to have them. But in the meantime, since we have Danielle here and we've been talking a lot about Curseborne, and if we already covered this in a previous panel that I wasn't on, feel free to say, hey, we already talked about that. But what are some of the things that you saw in Storypath Ultra to really help emphasize the mysterious and horror nature of Curseborne compared to a lot of the other games we've done with Storypath have been very kind of action adventure-y?
So there was I did talk about this a little bit in the previous panel, but I actually want to bring up something that we made a change to that is not in the backer draft, so that
Okay.
so I'm kind of signaling, ooh, when you get your PDF, if you
Oh,
you know
sure,
if you're
yeah.
back. So we did realize, there's a couple of things that were going on, right? There's definitely the cursed dice and rolling for wicked successes and cruel failures that just make the game a little more dramatic. But we also kind of realized that we talk a lot about death, like the dead are already dead. The outcasts can't die in battlegrounds and stuff like that, and so we were like, okay, well, this is interesting, but it's also, if we don't have death as an option, which a lot of our Storypath Ultra games don't really have death as an option unless you really want that,
Mm,
then those things don't make as much sense. So we sat down and we decided to make kind of a, a new status effect specifically, at least right now, for Curseborne, that is like a mortally wounded kind of situation. So
yep.
it's the near death. It would be aggravated wound in every other game. Aggravated wound still exists, but most things now, like that's a status effect you could still give to somebody through like a
Right.
power. But if you just take damage, you're going to get mortally wounded. And that is a timer that starts that if you do not get the right kind of action done for you, you will just die. And so it allows for players to have the stakes of my character could die, but also it is a condition, it's a status effect that can be removed. It can
Get
be,
that sucker removed.
yeah,
Yeah.
get that sucker
Mitigated
removed,
somehow.
get it
Right.
mitigated, because that's the thing, right? Like you can be mortally wounded and not be dead yet.
Yep.
And if somebody, let's just do something really kind of graphic and gruesome. If the bad guy, if a bar guest jumps on you and grabs your head in its jaws and starts lashing you about, and you are being rattled about, and they snap your neck, and you're not quite dead, but you're going to be paralyzed for freaking ever, unless, and in this moment, you're paralyzed, and then in another moment, you'll be dead. And then your friends get the bar guest off of you, and they have
Mhm.
a moment, just a moment, to use magic to fix you. Otherwise, you are going to die. That's kind of where we are, right? That's the kind of horror where it's like we're watching our friend be murdered right in front of us, and we need to stop that. And we need to fix that. Otherwise, they will die. But they're not just, piano falls on them and then they go splat, right? Like, we
Right.
don't want that. We want it to be dramatic. We want it to be tense. We want people to feel like they can claw their way out of that defeat without without also just feeling too easy to always just kind of brush off attacks or damage or the awful things that might happen to you in Curseborne.
When you said bar guest, I heard it as bar guest, and I'm like, a guest at the bar, and they're
Yeah,
doing that. Well,
yeah,
lousy guest.
terrible guess.
You were banned
It's
from this bar, sir.
that is
That man's head out of your mouth.
yeah, I mean that is Curseborne for you.
There's a picture of like this person's not allowed to buy beer or shoot
Right.
people's heads in this
Yeah,
bar.
yeah. This person's not allowed to be in this bar anymore. They know what they did.
They don't forget what they did.
Blame Ted.
Another question is, are there any quick home brews you've incorporated as SPU core rules?
Hmm. I
I
don't
have one if you're still thinking.
Yeah, I don't think I have one, so
Um, uh, one thing, well, one thing that Matthew mentions when he was running the world below to folks is originally we and I don't think it's ever saw the light of day, so I think this is purely internal. We had bonds working in a much more restricted way. Bonds, for those who don't know, is that you have a emotional connection to another character in the game, and that's a level, and that gives you a certain amount of enhancement you could add to certain roles. And we had certain qualifiers, like you have to be in the same space, you can only do it once a time, blah blah blah. And Matthew was like, people just don't seem to be using these. And so in I think it was our Pathcast game, just started using bonds whenever, as long as you can relate it to. I think specifically it was uh, I pushed someone else out of the way because they were my friend and I was willing to sacrifice myself to save them, and I used that bond of friendship with them. And the match was like, yeah, sure, why not? It doesn't quite work with the rules we've written down at the moment, but that sounds cool. And so we kind of opened that up a bit more to really make that a cooler and more interesting system, because really at the end of the day this is meant to be dramatic games.
mhm.
And so absolutely should be like I have an enemy of 5, you're the Dr. Doom to my Reed Richards, and so absolutely I should be able to move heaven and earth to get the vengeance I rightfully demand from you, and therefore spend 5 enhancement to be able to do ungodly things.
Yeah.
Damn you, Richards.
Yeah, I think that also having that really like enhanced what I did with At the Gates, because we
Mhm.
talked about that. Where it's like, okay, let's, there's these restrictions around bonds. Like, okay, let's pull them back some. Okay,
Yep.
cool, that's great. And then I had all these, teamwork, which they're called teamwork tricks, but really
Right.
they are just anytime you're doing a thing and your bondmate is also like kind of doing that thing, you take an action, the bondmate's there, you get to spend your bond enhancement to buy one of these tricks.
Yep.
And they're there to emulate the kind of cool like combo actions that you see in like uh Chrono Trigger or even in
3 houses.
Three Houses. Yeah, a
Mhm.
lot of the Suikoden have a bunch of combo stuff. Like a lot of the games that At the Gates is being kind of inspired by have this kind of like you've got your friends and then you build up friendship and then you have these cool like double slash things that people can do. And so I wanted to make those and I was like, oh, we'll do it as bond things. And when we open up bonds, then they become more, oh yeah, I can use this at any time just because we're both in the same scene.
Yep. Another question, has there been any major changes to SBU that you've implemented from reader feedback? I
Hmm.
think major's the word that is doing a bit of heavy lifting there, because I don't think we've made like this system works fundamentally differently based on feedback.
No, yeah, I can't think of a major change, but there's plenty of small like
Yeah,
tweaks and improvements and clarifications that we've made
I will
based
say
on
one
reader
thing that
feedback.
changed let's call it change focus, change scope through feedback, specifically is difficulty 0 rolls.
Yes.
Originally, it was a sidebar we put in there for occasionally this is going to be an issue. Let's just put it in there to close that edge case. And then we discovered that for a lot of the determining a difficulty rolls, specifically like defense and integrity and whatnot, that we had missed difficulty 1 rolls, and it led to bad feelings where you'd roll and succeed, but nothing would change. We realized, oh no, those should be difficulty 0 rolls. And so, oh hey, we happen to have a difficulty 0 sidebar here. It works just fine. Again, it's a core rule. We don't have to change the core rule, but we were able to expand on that core rule to make these all difficulty 0 rolls.
Right.
And it feels a lot better. And we got a lot of immediate response going, yes, that feels right.
Right.
And that did come from people talking online and going,
Yep.
Specifically, I think it was the, hey, I could do an investigation roll and succeed and I get nothing. Because you have to spend tricks for additional clues, and it's like that's not what we wanted.
No. Yeah.
We have a Curseborne specific question. If you were dead and your body should be paralyzed, does the dead still animate it? I don't see why it wouldn't.
Well, no. Okay, so this is kind of weird, right? So you're dead and you're inhabiting your body, but your body takes damage, and your body gets status effects, and so if it is a kind of and this is my own thought, is when you're possessing something, you are fully embodying it.
Yep.
And so if it's paralyzed, like psychologically, you're paralyzed, right?
Unless you bail.
Yeah. Unless you bail. Exactly. So, oh, my body should be paralyzed. And you just go, oh, I'm not in that body anymore. I'm over here. I'm going to possess this other body. I'm dead. You can't paralyze me. Yes, but your body is still just, boop, it's stuck.
Right. And I think a part of it is animate is kind of a misleading word there. Because you could be, and this is me speaking from a disability standpoint, I admit, you could be paralyzed and still be a person. But I get what's happening here is like, yes, you succeeded in quote unquote animating it, but it's not actually physically moving and therefore it's not animated.
It's the nature. I think it's the nature of the tag. It's nature of paralyzed, right?
Right.
Yeah, you can't move the things on the body. Like you're still in it. You're still there, like just a person. That's what the dead is doing. But
right. Could the body move if you were not a ghost? You were just in the brain, like a normal. I'm gonna try to move.
You still be able to perceive. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. But it can't. That's the kind of thing. Unless you leave the body.
Yeah.
And get another one, the body's going to be, and you're going to be stuck with those tags.
Yeah. Right. Absolutely.
And then we have one last question, and I'll call it. Are teamwork actions meant to combine dice pools? Reading it, it sounds like both players add their hits together, which seems like exceeding dice pool restrictions. Bit of a clash of terminology here. Each person rolls their dice pools separately. And then figure out the hits they have and then spend those on their respective rolls. One thing that it's in the rules, but maybe people aren't parsing it correctly when something we can look at, is that each of those had their own separate complications. So the idea is that yes, you have more hits to bring to the table, as it were, but if you don't both buy off your complications, then the complications will impact the team. But on the upside, you could add more hits together to do bigger things. So that's the push and pull of doing things in teamwork.
Right.
So for example, if you have 3 people who could work together and one of them has lots of complications, you don't want to have the guy who's bleeding on the sidewalk helping you lift something, right?
Right.
Because he has too many complications. You stay over there, buddy. We got this. We'll lift this thing. You keep your complications way the fuck over there, away from us.
Please don't, create a slick pool of blood underneath us that we are now going to slip in. And all of those things. So it is a single difficulty. Everybody rolls their own dice pools and then overcome the difficulty. Have the hits. They pull those hits together. They buy off. Each person has to buy off whatever complications are attached to them. Some complications apply to everybody together. Some, like the guy who's bleeding, has his own just kind of on him. But they do affect, if one person doesn't buy off a complication, everybody kind of gets boned by it.
Right.
But it's very much a timing stage of the thing. You do this, you do this, you do this, you do this. It's not a overarching, put all the dice pools together.
Right, exactly. Yeah, everyone's running separately and then combining the results rather than adding all the dice together.
Yep.
So
Okay.
cool. Then now we're dead on time, so that we will call it there. I want to thank both Rich and Danielle for hanging out with me and talking nerdy game design stuff, because they both know how much I hate talking about nerdy design stuff for an hour.
It's awful.
I hate it. It's just so bad. The worst thing
like-
ever.
Well, thanks to everybody who tuned in and sent us these great questions. We really nicely paced all the way through here. So thank you so much.
And in 30 minutes, we will have our community content panel with Travis and a host of friends. And then after that will be our closing ceremonies where Rich and Dixie talk some mad smack. So
Okay.
I think we're just going to talk Broadway musicals. Yep.
Probably.
Amazing.
Probably.
Very good.
Probably. So we will see you all at the next panels. Talk to you later.
See you. Thanks.
Bye.
Okay.